What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another video and another review roundup. Today we're talking about two brand new movies that I got to check out just a little bit early, both of them coming out later this week on March 17th of 2023. So depending on when you're watching this video, these movies may or may not have already been released, and maybe that's what brought you here to this review. But without further ado, let's get into the first review here in this video, and that's for a movie called Leave. Directed by Alex Herron and written by Thomas Moldestad, this film stars people like Alicia Van Ripberg, Morten Holst, Herman Tomaras, Clarence Smith, and many more. And as usual, I always like to start off these early screener reviews by saying a big thanks to the studio that sent me over this screener, and that is Shudder, the horror streaming service. I want to say a big thanks to them for sending me a screener for this. I'm always happy to see any of their movies early, whether I enjoy them or not. And yeah, today we're talking about Leave, the movie that's going to be hitting their platform later this week on March 17th exclusively. And I'm going to go ahead and just start this off and be honest and say that I was not a huge fan of Leave. I went into this with absolutely no information and found out after having watched the film that the director Alex Herron, this is actually his first feature film that he's ever directed. He's been directing for quite some time, but predominantly did music videos or TV specials that were almost documentaries on various music artists. And so going into this, I had no idea what this movie was going to be about. I had no idea who was in the film. I just went in completely blind, only having seen the poster, which honestly doesn't give away a lot. Now, for the sake of this review, as somebody who talks about movies, I obviously am going to get a little bit more in depth on this movie, so let's get into the base premise of this film without getting too far into spoilers. This movie opens up with a police call as we hear a woman saying that there's a baby crying in a cemetery. When a police officer ends up showing up, he ends up finding this baby there that's wrapped in some sort of black cloth. As soon as the officer gets this baby to his police car, he ends up unraveling the baby from the thing that she was wrapped in, the cloth that she was wrapped in, and he ends up seeing that she's in some sort of demonic wrapping. The imagery on this cloth is demonic, it's dark. He's like, what the hell's going on? The baby has an upside down cross necklace on, and then we get the title card, and then we jump to the future where we're introduced to the main character of this film, played by Alicia Van Ripberg, and that character's name is Hunter, and she is the young girl that we saw at the very beginning of the film. And we learn from this time skip that the officer who ended up saving her actually adopted this young girl as well, and now she's much older, is about to head off to college. Her father seeing her off, at least that's what he thinks, and actually she instead has decided to go and try to discover the roots of her heritage, and ends up finding that there's a bit of a darker past when it comes to her family and where she came from. And I won't get much further into the story or the things that unfold here, but yeah, I'll go ahead and just be straight with you guys and say that unfortunately Leave was not a movie I really enjoyed. I just found this film to be really dull. I felt like it dragged on. I felt like I'd have seen this movie before. I felt like it was filled with cliches. I feel like while there was something about this film that I could understand how on paper somebody would say, hey, that could honestly be a solid movie to produce, ultimately the finished product for me just felt like a cliche, been there, done that kind of movie. There are so many different tropes and cliche elements that come from the horror genre that any tenured horror fan is going to watch this and kind of be bored. I'm sure there will be an audience for this, as there is with most movies, but me personally and what I look for in movies, I found that the narrative just felt very aimless at times, and it was strange because while the film had a focus, I often never really understood the overall goal of everything happening, all the character motivations and various things that were going on. There was times we were going from scene to scene and meeting a bunch of various characters, and it didn't always feel like it flowed very well. Again, there is a sense of focus because we know that our main character is trying to uncover things about her heritage, uncover things about her past, uncover why she was left in a cemetery and why that all happened. But ultimately, I just kind of felt like the scenes didn't flow all that well. The pacing was really slow at times, and it really wasn't until the last 15 minutes that it felt like things were really starting to be revealed that actually piqued my interest. And at that point, I had already kind of checked out because around the 45-minute to hour mark of this film, I ultimately just found myself bored. It felt like it took 2 hours to get to the first hour of this film, and after that, it was just kind of slowly dragging along until we got to the end, where some things start to happen, but ultimately I found that even some of the things that happened near the end of the film on a logic standpoint didn't really make sense with what we had seen before, and I just felt like overall there was a lapse in logic when it came to a lot of the characters and certain dialogue throughout the course of the film. And ultimately I think the biggest part that I could just say about this is that I never really felt like the movie made me care about the characters and their journey, specifically Hunter, the main character, the girl who's going out trying to find her family, trying to find out what happened. And while there is a dark past, while there is some paranormal stuff that happens here, I ultimately found myself really bored with Leave, and it's not a film, unfortunately, that I can recommend. It comes out later this week, as I mentioned, on the streaming service Shudder, the horror streaming service. You guys can find it there if you're interested. If you're here on this review right now because you watched it and you just want to hear what somebody else had to say, I definitely want to invite you to leave your comments down below. Did you like the movie? If you did, please let me know what you enjoyed about it more than I did. If you didn't like the movie, well, definitely want to hear your thoughts on it as well. So yeah, honestly, didn't like Leave, didn't really love it, can't really recommend it. But without further ado, let's go ahead and get into the next review here in the video, and that is for a movie called All the World is Sleeping. Written and directed by Ryan Layson and starring people like Melissa Barrera, Jackie Cruz, Jorge Garcia, and many more, All the World is Sleeping is a very tough tug on the heart about drug addiction. As I did last time, I want to say a big thanks to Gravitas Ventures this time around for sending me over an early screener for this one. And I want to start this off right out of the gate by saying that I really enjoyed this film, and I also want to go ahead and start this off by saying that I am absolutely mind blown that this film actually premiered originally in 2021 at a festival. If you look this movie up anywhere online, IMDb, anything like that, it'll say it came out in 2021, but if you look at where it was actually released, it was just because it played in one festival in 2021, and not until later this week on March 17th will it finally get a online release, digital, on demand, places you can rent it and purchase it, as well as a limited theatrical release after a couple of years. It's kind of crazy that it took this long for a movie that stars a star like Melissa Barrera to get some sort of distribution. It's kind of crazy to me. I almost feel like this is a movie that could have come out in theaters. I understand how and why that's not the case, but yeah, I gotta start this off by saying that I was really impressed by Melissa Barrera here. I mean, I've already enjoyed her in the Scream films, I enjoyed her in The Heights, and I've seen her in a couple other things, but this without a doubt for me is her standout performance, and it's kind of crazy to me that it's coming out in this movie that might kind of go under the radar, and I honestly hope that that's not the case. I think Melissa Barrera is fantastic in this film, and I would argue that this is the best performance I've ever seen from her, and the best way I could really describe my feelings towards her performance here is kind of how I feel with Brendan Fraser's The Whale recently, or Brendan Fraser in The Whale, where he gives this incredibly nuanced, believable performance that's kind of the best of when it comes to his career, but ultimately is so heavy on the heart and tackles such heavy subject matter that honestly it's one of those performances you really can't see yourself revisiting too often. When it comes to Brendan Fraser, I think that The Whale is his best performance, but when it comes down to what I'm gonna want to see in terms of Brendan Fraser, I'm typically gonna lean probably more towards The Mummy or Encino Man or any of his other sillier roles, even George of the Jungle, because those are nice, fun entertainment films that I can watch that make me shut my brain off and give me some escapism. But in the case of a movie like this or The Whale, yeah, I really gotta praise Melissa Barrera here for digging deep. I think this is the most nuanced, raw, visceral, very, very believable performance that she's given. And yeah, it's not one that I can see myself revisiting often because of the weight of the performance and everything she kind of had to carry on her shoulders. But I want to start this off by praising Melissa Barrera 100%. I mean, this is without a doubt her best performance, and I hope that this movie slowly starts to trickle out and starts to gain more eyes, because I think this is a movie that people need to hear about and a movie that people need to see. Now, the base premise of this film, without getting too far into it, is like, as I mentioned before, it's about drug addiction, and we're honing in on a character named Elena, or Chama as she's also known in the film by other people, and it's kind of a nickname she has, and she's played by Melissa Barrera, and she is a drug addict. And what's interesting about this film is over the course of the film, we jump over the course of time, seeing her as a young girl, seeing the issues she's dealt with when it came to her mother, seeing her a little bit before where we're seeing her at in this movie, where she was in a happier place in her life, and now we're seeing her with a daughter and struggling with drug addiction and trying to stay out of trouble, and ultimately finding herself in more trouble to the point where police are getting involved, and you have like child protective services getting involved, and she's really just completely lost in the illness that is drug addiction. And I think this is going to be a movie that's going to be very tough for many people who have either dealt with drug addiction themselves or know somebody in their lives that has suffered from drug addiction. It's an illness, 110%. And I think that this is a movie that kind of helps change perspective, because I think it's easy, while I know it's an addiction and I know it's an illness, and I have people in my family who have suffered from it, and I have friends who have suffered from it, and you see it all over the world everywhere. It's easy to see people who are suffering from this illness and think it's just a personal selfish decision all the time. But usually if you dig deeper and you see interviews or you listen to people's stories, a lot of times, man, people just kind of find their way there. Maybe they use it for comfort, maybe they're homeless, they even use it for warmth because it's cold outside, and they find themselves lost in this addiction that honestly completely consumes who they are. And while it's easy to see somebody on the side of the street and go, oh man, they're tweaking, and kind of make a little sideways comment, this movie kind of helped kind of open my eyes a little bit more and kind of gave me a little more perspective and a reminder that these are people, and that the real sadness of this lifestyle is the cyclical nature of it. And so while I may have called the last movie not that great because of its narrative being aimless, this film uses an aimless narrative at times to kind of really highlight that cyclical nature of an aimless life that somebody who is addicted to drugs has. And so I think that this film really leans heavily into that very impactful message. On top of that element, the heavy element of it, and really showcasing it in a realistic way, you have fantastic performances from not only Melissa Barrera, but the rest of the cast. And then on top of that, you also have just beautiful cinematography. This film is beautifully shot. There's so many great moments of camera work over the course of this film that really highlight some of the over-the-top editing as well. There's some really artistic editing throughout the entirety of the film that really gives this film its unique energy. There's a lot of moments where you have our character played by Melissa Barrera having a bit of a voiceover narration in her mind at times, whether it's showing us a little bit of her past, showing us a little bit of her future, and kind of seeing where she wants to be. And I think that this film really does a great job of tackling the tragedy and the trauma that comes from this world, but also what really needs to happen, and the help you need, the support system you need, and the will within yourself that you need to find hope and peace and a light at the end of the tunnel when you're lost in something like this kind of addiction. And I think that Melissa Barrera really brought it home here. I thought that the performances were great. I thought this film was beautifully well made, and ultimately I really enjoyed the film. But I do want to go ahead and lean into some of my negatives now and say that this was a bit of a longer film. It's almost 2 hours long, and I did feel the runtime. It is a slow film. It is 110% a slow burn, and I did check the runtime throughout the course of the film on a number of occasions, simply because I just found myself, a little bit bored in little moments. There were elements about the film that ultimately did drag on, but I say that also recognizing that this is a movie that won me over the course of the runtime. So by the time I got to the end, those smaller moments that felt slower earlier in the film, I feel really helped to establish the characters, really helped to establish the journey for Elena here, played by Melissa Barrera. And I think that her performance overall in all of those sequences is really the backbone of this film. And while there are elements that are slow, while there may have been some things that could have been trimmed out here or there, whatever the case may be, I do genuinely think that the film was great. I do think it was very well made. I think it's very impactful, even if it's slow, even if it's a little bit boring at times. And so I say that recognizing that there's probably going to be an audience of people who check out from this movie a little bit early and don't really get further in this movie because of how slow the pacing is. But there are some people who are going to get to the end and be, big film fans, and just, you're not going to be able to watch this film from beginning to end and not praise all of the beauty that came to making this film, whether it be the sound design, again, the performances, the cinematography, and all the various other elements that really did kind of take you on a journey. I feel like I went on a journey with the character of Elena here, and I really just found myself invested, and I really found myself, again, having a change of perspective in realizing, how sad this lifestyle is for so many people, how lost so many people are, and how cyclical the life cycle is. You could think that somebody is doing better. You can think that they are on this path of recovery, and they can instantly relapse. And so, again, kind of leaning back into the narrative structure, I like that this film kind of sometimes had a lack of focus almost ultimately really relaying the same feeling that our main character is feeling, and that cyclical nature of her starting to get better but ultimately relapsing and having to kind of start over. I thought that this movie captured that really well, and while the film is slow, while this film does drag at times, by the time I got to the end of it, I can honestly say that this was a really solid, well-made film. But I also want to recognize that it's a film I don't really see myself revisiting anytime soon. I don't know, this is a movie that I'm kind of clamoring to rewatch just because of how heavy it is, because of how long it is, and kind of how slow it is. So I feel like this is going to be a very strong first time watch for a lot of people, and maybe not a movie that people are clamoring to revisit, but kind of a movie that's hard to not praise how well made it is. So that's going to be my thoughts on both Leave, a film I didn't really like that's coming to Shudder later this week on March 17th. Check it out if you're interested. And my thoughts on All the World is Sleeping, which I really agree with that title. The world is sleeping in a lot of ways, about drug addiction and the poor people that are all out there. There are selfish people that just want to do drugs for the sake of their own lives and they don't really care, but there are a lot of people that are just lost in their world, lost in this cyclical cycle of illness. And I think that title is really strong. So clearly I really enjoyed the second film here, All the World is Sleeping, which comes out later this week in select theaters in a limited run, as well as online, digital, on demand, all that jazz on March 17th as well. So a big thanks to you guys for watching. Hit that like button if you guys enjoyed the video. Comment your thoughts down below. Subscribe for more videos, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye-bye.